The music had already faded, but the night air still carried the echo of laughter. Students spilled out from the dorms, their voices soft under the dim yellow lamps. On the edge of campus grass lay a single shoe, abandoned, half buried in dirt. No one saw 19-year-old Marissa Hale slip into the darkness. No one stopped the man who walked beside her. By dawn, the laughter was gone, replaced by the silence of absence. A campus frozen in questions, a family beginning a fight that would last decades. And the name Marissa Hale whispered through courtrooms, newsrooms, and police files until justice came too late. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Marissa Hale disappeared on a night that had begun with nothing unusual. The campus was alive with the end-of-term party season, May air heavy with the scent of cut grass and beer spilled into the soil. Music pulsed from the fraternity house on Perimeter Drive. Cars lined the curb in crooked rows. Groups of students drifted in and out of doorways, their laughter thinning as the hours slid past midnight. She was last seen just before 2 a.m. Witnesses remembered her pale blue sweater, the kind she wore often, sleeves rolled up as if to fend off the warmth of the crowd. She wore white canvas shoes scuffed at the heel. Friends saw her leave the party with Ethan Rowe, a sophomore known on campus but regarded with suspicion. Some thought she looked unsteady, her weight leaning into his side. The path from the house to Fremont Hall was short. The straight walk should have taken 10 minutes. But somewhere in that distance, Marissa vanished. At 2:15 a.m., 2 students cut through the science quad and glimpsed the pair under a failing lamp. Marissa stumbled once, bending forward as though to adjust her shoe. They saw Ethan tug her arm lightly, and then they disappeared behind the row of hedges. The students walked on, unaware their testimony would become the final sighting of her alive. Inside Fremont Hall, her roommate Lena Torres waited. She had left the party earlier, choosing sleep over noise. When she woke briefly at 3 a.m., she noticed Marissa's bed was empty. She thought little of it. But when she rose at 7 a.m., the bed still untouched, she felt unease press into her chest. By 10 a.m., Marissa had missed her first lecture. Her watch remained on the desk, unwound. Her books, phone, and jacket lay untouched. Campus security logs from that night listed nothing out of order. A guard noted scattered cans on the lawn, a lamp not functioning on the quad. What the log failed to mention was what detectives would later find under that same lamp. A single white canvas shoe, pressed into damp earth, its laces caked with dirt. A partial drag mark trailed away from it, no more than 3 feet before vanishing into the grass. Lena reported Marissa missing by noon. Calls spread quickly. Richard and Elaine Hale received the news that evening. Their daughter, careful and cautious, had vanished without explanation. Officers asked standard questions. Did she have a history of leaving home? Had she argued with family? Was she under stress? None of it fit. She had made weekend plans. She had spoken of summer jobs. She was not the kind to disappear voluntarily. Detective Harold Keene took over within hours. He retraced Marissa's final walk. Photographs captured the discarded shoe under the lamp. Measurements of the drag marks were recorded, shallow, inconsistent, as though weight had been unevenly borne. Soil samples were taken. The area was sealed with yellow tape that fluttered in the night wind. Interviews began that same night. Ethan Rowe admitted he had walked her back from the party but claimed she had broken away near the dorms. He said he had gone home and slept. He offered no reason why her shoe would be lying in the grass. Detectives noted the absence of dirt on his own shoes, the quickness with which he answered. His apartment was checked. Nothing unusual was found. He was released. By morning, the campus shifted from celebration to silence. Posters appeared on bulletin boards. Students traded rumors that she had run away, that she had overdosed, that she had been taken by someone passing through. But those who had been near the quad that night remembered only the quiet glow of the lamp, the patch of dirt beneath it, and the shoe standing alone as though left in flight. The shoe lay alone under the dorm light. The first full search began within 24 hours of Marissa's disappearance. Campus police widened the perimeter around Fremont Hall, sealing off the quad and the nearby science building. By mid-morning, volunteers walked in lines across the lawns, eyes down, hands gloved. Flyers with her photograph spread from bulletin boards to storefronts in town. The Hale family joined the search, Richard Hale combing the fields in silence while Elaine waited at the command post set up in a lecture hall. Detective Harold Keene directed the operation. His notes described a missing student with no indication of voluntary departure. The shoe collected under the lamp was logged as Exhibit A. The drag mark through the grass was sketched in detail, length and curvature measured to the inch. Soil samples were stored in paper bags to preserve moisture traces. Dogs were brought in from the county. At 11 a.m., one German shepherd caught Marissa's scent from the shoe. Handlers led the dog across the quad. The animal pulled sharply toward the parking lot before circling twice and stopping at the edge of the asphalt. The scent ended there. Investigators marked the spot with a red flag and photographed tire depressions nearby. Later examination showed impressions consistent with an older sedan, but the pattern was incomplete, rain having softened the soil. The search extended into the nearby hills. Deputies on horseback rode trails, their radios crackling with false alarms. A backpack that belonged to someone else, clothing that matched no description, footprints washed by runoff. Helicopters scanned with infrared but detected nothing beyond deer and scattered heat signatures from students returning late to dorms. Back on campus, officers interviewed students from the party. Accounts conflicted. Tyler Mendez claimed he saw Ethan Rowe lead Marissa away, his hand firm on her back. Sophie Tran insisted Marissa left smiling, laughing at something Ethan had said. Another student reported she seemed reluctant, glancing back more than once. Keene recorded each statement, noting contradictions and gaps. Inside Fremont Hall, Lena Torres opened Marissa's closet for police. Clothing hung in neat order. Her suitcase was still on the shelf. Wallet, identification, and bank card lay in a desk drawer. A receipt dated May 24 showed a purchase at a bookstore, a packet of pens, and a notebook. No evidence suggested she had planned to leave. At dusk, officers gathered in the command post. The evidence board held few items. A single shoe, photographs of drag marks, sent trail ending at asphalt, testimony inconsistent. Keene wrote in his log, likely removed from campus by vehicle. No body, no weapon, witnesses unreliable. The Hale family pushed for broader searches. Volunteers expanded into creeks, fields, and abandoned barns. They returned with objects later cataloged and dismissed. Scrap fabric, empty bottles, discarded shoes unrelated to the case. Each item was photographed, tagged, and stored, then crossed out when no connection appeared. By the end of the second day, exhaustion set in. The sun fell behind the hills, painting the sky a dull red. Richard Hale remained at the lot where the scent trail had stopped. He stared at the asphalt as if answers could surface through cracks in the pavement. Elaine sat beside the evidence board, her eyes fixed on the shoe photograph pinned at its center. The first search closed without a body, without direction, leaving behind only measured grids on the lawns and flags fading in the grass. The scent vanished at the edge of asphalt. Rumors spread faster than the flyers pinned to bulletin boards. Within days of the failed search, the campus pulsed with speculation. Some students whispered that Marissa had run away, overwhelmed by school. Others suggested she had overdosed, her body hidden by frightened friends. A few clung to the story of a secret romance gone wrong. Each rumor found a life of its own, feeding on silence. Detective Harold Keene sorted through the noise with growing frustration. He interviewed partygoers again, pressing for consistency. Tyler Mendez repeated that Ethan Rowe had guided Marissa from the house, his grip firm. Sophie Tran swore she had seen no distress, only laughter. Another witness claimed Marissa walked alone at one point, her sweater pulled tight, eyes down. No two accounts aligned. Police reviewed security measures. Cameras on the parking lot had malfunctioned. The tape from that night showed nothing between 1:45 and 3 a.m. The system log cited technical error. Technicians later determined someone had manually disabled the recording. The camera itself had not been broken. This absence became Exhibit B. It was photographed, logged, and added to the board beside the shoe. At the Hale family home, phones rang constantly. Calls came from strangers offering theories, psychics claiming visions, people demanding updates. Elaine answered each until her voice broke. Richard took notes on a yellow pad. Names, numbers, claims. Few led anywhere. One caller insisted Marissa had been spotted at a bus station 50 miles away. Another said she had boarded a train to San Francisco. Detectives followed, checked surveillance, interviewed staff. No trace appeared. By week's end, the case tilted toward Ethan Rowe. He admitted again he had walked with her but insisted she parted near Fremont Hall. He had gone to his apartment alone, he said, and slept. Yet his neighbors did not confirm this. One claimed he heard the door open after 3 a.m., not before. Another said Ethan's car was missing from its usual space that night. Keene obtained a warrant to examine Ethan's car, an aging brown sedan. The interior smelled faintly of bleach. Carpeting was damp. Forensic technicians swabbed the floor mats, the trunk, the door handles. Results returned inconclusive. Traces of cleaning agents, no blood, no hair. Still, the timing raised suspicion. The car was photographed and logged as Exhibit C. Meanwhile, false leads multiplied. A hiker reported finding women's clothing near a creek. Deputies retrieved them, sealed them in evidence bags. Lab analysis revealed they belonged to someone else, unrelated to Marissa. Another report suggested a girl matching her description had been seen in a diner north of campus. Witnesses disagreed on hair color, height, and clothing. That lead collapsed. Media attention arrived quickly. Local news ran segments showing her photograph, the abandoned shoe, the taped-off quad. Reporters pressed the family for interviews. Elaine stood before cameras, voice steady, pleading for information. "Someone knows what happened," she said. "Please come forward." Students grew restless under scrutiny. Some avoided investigators, fearing their own underage drinking would be exposed. Others exaggerated their accounts to gain attention. Keene documented contradictions carefully. His log grew heavy with names crossed out, sightings disproven. One detail haunted him, the blank security tape. Forensic examination confirmed manual tampering. The system required a key to access. Only a small group of staff and students had clearance. Ethan's part-time work included maintenance duties in that building. When confronted, he denied involvement. He claimed he had never touched the cameras. His statement was logged, his denial underlined. Richard Hale pressed harder. He requested the district attorney to treat Ethan as a suspect. Without a body, without blood, the office hesitated. The case hovered between suspicion and proof. By summer, the campus emptied. Students left town, leaving behind posters fading in sunlight. The dorm where Marissa had lived remained unchanged. Her desk gathered dust. A half-finished notebook lay open, pen uncapped. The watch still rested on the wooden surface, hands frozen at 12:04. Lena refused to move anything. Detectives pursued each rumor, each false lead, marking them in reports. Each ended in the same word, negative. But the evidence board in the lecture hall command post remained stark. Exhibit A, the shoe. Exhibit B, the blank tape. Exhibit C, the cleaned car. And in the center, the photograph of a 19-year-old who should have walked 10 minutes home. A blank camera tape marked the critical hour. Summer heat pressed over San Luis Obispo when the first physical trace beyond the shoe was uncovered. Weeks had passed. Rumors had burned out, but the Hale family refused to let silence take root. Volunteers still combed trails, drainage ditches, and abandoned sheds. On July 12, a deputy searching the brush north of campus noticed fabric tangled in thorns. The fragment was pale blue, weathered, edges torn. It matched the description of the sweater Marissa had worn that night. The piece was photographed in place before removal. Forensic technicians documented soil composition, moisture, and insect activity. The cloth carried faint blood traces along one seam, degraded but still reactive to luminol. Fibers were bagged and compared to items recovered from Marissa's dorm closet. Under magnification, the weave pattern and dye matched. Exhibit D. Nearby, investigators found tire impressions in softened dirt. Casts were made with dental stone, each curve preserved. The tracks measured consistent with a mid-size sedan. Tread wear resembled patterns from Ethan Rowe's vehicle but lacked the clarity to confirm. The impression was logged as Exhibit E. The discovery reignited media attention. News cameras captured deputies carrying sealed evidence bags, the pale cloth inside. Elaine Hale stood behind the police line, face pale, her hands clutching her son Daniel's arm. She whispered that it was hers, that she had folded it for laundry the week before the party. Richard remained silent, watching the evidence truck pull away. Detective Keene noted in his report that the fabric suggested force. The tear marks were irregular, not clean, consistent with the sweater being pulled violently. The blood streak, though faint, hinted at injury. Entomologists studied insect activity on the cloth to estimate time of exposure. Results indicated the fabric had lain in the brush since late May, close to the night of disappearance. The site was scoured. Cadaver dogs swept the surrounding ground, their handlers moving carefully in grids. At one point, a dog alerted near a shallow depression in soil, pawing and whining. Excavation revealed only disturbed earth, no remains. Soil samples were taken, chemical analysis later showing higher than normal traces of lime. Investigators marked the area as possible concealment attempt. Students returning for summer classes found campus heavy with tension. Flyers were reprinted, now including details about the fabric discovery. Local talk centered on Ethan Rowe once more. His car had been seen parked near the access road leading to the brush in early June. A neighbor recalled him washing it late at night, hoses running long. Forensic technicians revisited his sedan. Under ultraviolet light, they found faint patterns in the trunk liner. Tests confirmed residues of cleaning agents mixed with organic proteins. Not blood definitive enough to type, but evidence that cleaning had occurred. It was added to the board, connected by red string to Exhibit D. Elaine Hale kept the photograph of the torn fabric on her kitchen table. She pressed her hand against it as if touch could confirm truth. Daniel began logging every lead himself, creating a second board in their garage. Each pin, each string, a mirror of the police investigation but without bureaucratic restraint. The pale fragment shifted the case from whispers to weight. For the first time there was physical confirmation of violence, evidence Marissa had been injured. Yet no body, no weapon, no confession. Only torn threads in a plastic bag and tire marks crumbling at the edges. The torn fabric clung to the soil like skin. Neighbors had seen the Rowe sedan at odd hours. A retiree across the street told detectives it idled in the driveway well past midnight the week after Marissa disappeared. Another remembered the trunk open and a light on in the garage. When Detective Harold Keene pulled the property records, he noted a basement listed in the tax file, unfinished, with poured slab. The house sat on the edge of town, a low stucco structure with hedges grown too high. A narrow door on the side led down concrete steps to a space that smelled of damp stone and detergent. Consent to search came first. Ethan's parents opened the door, voices clipped, eyes tired. They insisted they knew nothing, that their son was being hounded. Keene walked the stairs, noting dust patterns, scuffs on the risers, small crescents of dirt on the edges where a heavy object might have scraped. The basement was cleared on one side, cluttered on the other with boxes, a rusted workbench, and a borrowed cement mixer tucked beneath a tarp. A thin line cut across the floor, a shade of gray slightly different from the rest. Keene crouched, pressed his palm to the concrete, and felt the smoothness of a recent trowel. Photographs were taken. A laser thermometer mapped temperatures across the slab. The readings showed a consistent band of cooler values along the line. Moisture meters registered higher readings over the same rectangle, as if water had not fully left the mix. In the corner, bags of Quikrete slumped half-used, their paper skin stiff with clay dust. A receipt from a hardware store lay in the trash, time-stamped 3 days after Marissa vanished. It listed cement, lime, plastic sheeting, and a rental deposit for a concrete saw. The receipt went into an evidence bag and onto the chain of custody form. Keene asked a canine handler to sweep the basement. The dog circled twice, then gave a trained sit near the center of the cooler rectangle. The handler called the alert. A second dog repeated the behavior, nose pressing to the slab before whining. Keene wrote in his notebook, "Cadaver K9 alert, same location, rectangular patch, approx 4 by 7 feet." He photographed the chalk outline he drew to mark the perimeter. But consent had limits. Ethan's father refused any destructive testing. Without a judge's order, Keene could not drill or cut the slab. He backed out, slow, collecting swabs from the floor drain, tracing the metal cover with a sterile Q-tip, removing hair caught in the grate. Upstairs, Ethan watched from the hallway, his face unreadable. Keene requested the warrant that night. In the meantime, technicians analyzed the swabs. Preliminary tests on the drain trap returned a positive for human hemoglobin, too degraded to type, mixed with bleach residues. The hair yielded no root. The receipt's time aligned with the neighbor's account of an idling sedan. The cement mixer, checked against a rental form, had been borrowed from a friend, returned with water inside the drum. The friend signed a statement that Ethan had asked for help with a patio repair. The warrant arrived the next morning. Officers returned with a concrete coring drill, ground-penetrating radar, and a forensic anthropologist. Radar scans rippled over the slab, sending back images broken by dense inclusions. The anthropologist pointed out anomalies in the outline Keene had chalked, a discontinuity near the corner, consistent with a void or differing rubble underlay. Cores were taken along the edge, each cylinder of concrete labeled bagged and later cut lengthwise in the lab. The smell in the basement shifted as the drill chewed down, wet limestone, hot metal, and something faint beneath it that clung to the back of the throat. From the first core, nothing but concrete. The second revealed hair-like fibers embedded near a seam, too few to identify by sight. The third cut down to a layer of compacted sand where a fragment of cloth lay folded into the fill, gray and stiff, no larger than a coin. It went to the lab. Keene weighed each risk and pushed for a larger cut. The judge's order permitted targeted excavation, not demolition. He traced a rectangle with tape and authorized the saw. The blade screamed. Slurry spread across the floor, gray water driven toward the drain. A wet vac captured most of it. What remained was mopped into sterile pans for later analysis. Beneath the slab lay rubble and sand tamped hard. Trowel marks on the underside of the removed section were still crisp, not softened by years. Plastic sheeting covered a portion of the base, the kind used as a vapor barrier, but it ran only halfway under the new patch. Someone had cut it to fit fast. The cadaver dog pressed its nose into the open void and sat again. The handler's voice stayed even as she logged the alert. Keene sifted the fill with a mesh screen. Small objects surfaced from grit. A bent staple, a bead of glass, a corner of flexible plastic. Near the eastern edge of the cut, he found a thin metal disc. It was the backing to an earring, the kind that locks a stud in place. In Marissa's dorm photographs, a silver stud had flashed at her ear. He placed the backing into a vial. The lab later recovered skin cells too degraded for a full profile, but enough to compare against a partial reference. A hair fragment from the rubble produced mitochondrial DNA consistent with Elaine Hale's maternal line. The match could not name Marissa alone, but it anchored the hair to her family. The report ran to 4 pages of caveats and probabilities. Keene added it to the board with a red string back to the dorm photo. Ethan's parents retained counsel and closed their door. The basement was sealed with police tape while the lab processed the cores. A temperature log, kept at Keen's insistence, documented the cooler band along the patch over several days, suggesting a pour more recent than the rest of the floor. A hardware store clerk identified Ethan in a photo lineup as the man who had purchased cement and lime for a small job. The rental desk confirmed the return time of the saw, 3:40 a.m. Word reached the campus before the evening news. Students whispered about a grave in a basement. Reporters crowded the sidewalk. Elaine came to the tape and stared down the stairs without speaking. Daniel stood beside her, hands clenched, breathing slow. Keen told them nothing they didn't already feel, that the slab had been cut, that pieces had been taken, that there was no body. They expanded the search to the backyard. Ground-penetrating radar swept garden beds and the strip of soil along the foundation, mapping roots and stones. Dogs looped the property, pausing twice near the far fence where dirt had been recently turned. Shovels went in cautiously. They found no remains. They found only a scatter of lime and 2 broken buttons, white plastic, both smooth with age. In the lab, the cloth fragment from the core released a scent when hydrated under a hood, a faint iron note. Stain tests reacted to hemoglobin. The weave matched the blue sweater fabric within a range of probability. Microscopy showed tearing consistent with force, not cut. The forensic anthropologist wrote in careful language, "Indicators of contact with biological material cannot exclude origin consistent with victim's clothing." The sentence did the work of a scream without raising its voice. Keen pushed for a full excavation. The district attorney hesitated. Without a body, without definitive DNA, they had fragments and alerts, and a saw returned at 3:40 a.m. Meanwhile, Ethan disappeared to a cousin's house 2 counties away. His attorney issued a statement. "This family has cooperated. There is no evidence of wrongdoing. Basements are for storage, not suspicion." At night, Keen returned to the basement alone, standing in the chalked rectangle, the cut edges drying to a lighter gray. He watched the thermometer numbers settle, the cooler band refusing to warm. He wrote a single line in his notebook: "If she was here, she is not here now." On the way out, he passed the drain and noted a tiny crescent of glitter caught against the grate. Under magnification later, it proved to be mica from drugstore makeup, a brand Marissa used, a color Lena recognized. It was not proof. It was not nothing. The house became a hinge in the case. Every path ran through it. Volunteers added its outline to their own maps. The Hale family taped a photograph of the basement wall beside the picture of the shoe and the torn sweater. 3 images arranged like an equation without a sum. Weeks turned to months. The slab was patched again by court order, this time with city inspectors present. The working face smoothed, dried, and joined the old floor in a continuous sheet. The tape came down. The door shut. The key clicked. Keen kept the cores in a locker and the photographs on his wall. He traced the line where old concrete met new until he knew it better than the lines of his own palm. He could not prove what the cold slab held or had held. He could not prove where the missing weight had gone. All he could do was arrange objects and let them speak. A receipt for cement, a saw in the night, dogs that sat without needing to be told twice, a hair that reached back through a mother to a daughter who had walked 10 minutes into the dark and failed to come out the other side. The concrete patch was colder than the rest of the floor. The discovery of the basement altered nothing and everything at once. There was still no body, no confession, no clear proof. Yet suspicion deepened. When the warrant expired and the tape came down, the Hale family turned their attention back to Marissa's room. They refused to wait for courts and prosecutors. Elaine asked Lena to box up her daughter's belongings for storage. It was during that slow, deliberate process that Lena found the notebook wedged between textbooks at the back of a drawer. The cover was worn, its edges chewed by use. Inside, handwriting angled forward, pages dated in her neat habit. At first the entries were unremarkable, notes on classes, scattered sketches, grocery lists. Then, as the spring semester advanced, sentences sharpened. Marissa wrote of feeling watched on campus. E. Waits outside after lecture. One line read, says he will walk me back whether I want or not. Another page described footsteps behind her when she left the library. Told him to stop. He laughed. Detective Harold Keene logged the journal as Exhibit F. Each page was photographed before bagging. Forensic specialists examined ink consistency, confirming dates matched late spring. Pressure indents on the final pages revealed faint outlines of words not fully written. Technicians used oblique lighting and electrostatic detection. Impressions emerged. Don't want to see him again. The last sentence ended mid-line, the pen stroke broken off. Lena admitted she had seen the notebook before but never read closely. She told police Marissa had grown quiet in the weeks leading to the party, eating little, keeping her phone on silent. Once, Lena recalled, Marissa returned late with dirt on her shoes, saying only that Ethan had followed her across the quad until she locked the dorm door. This was logged as a supplemental witness statement, attached to the journal findings. At the Hale household, Elaine read each page with trembling fingers. Richard refused to touch it. Daniel photographed key lines and uploaded them to a private website he had begun maintaining, a digital record of every clue, every document. He argued the words showed harassment long before the night of disappearance. In the district attorney's office, prosecutors debated weight. A journal was circumstantial, they said. It confirmed unease, not crime. Yet it added dimension to the profile of Ethan Rowe, not merely last companion but a persistent shadow in her life. Media coverage seized on the journal. News anchors displayed blown-up copies of lines. He will walk me back whether I want or not. Students whispered in cafeterias about Ethan's stare, his habit of loitering near residence halls. Old memories resurfaced. A girl from another dorm recalled him at her window one night, silent. A classmate remembered him cornering Marissa at a vending machine, blocking the exit until she slipped away. None had reported it then. Each spoke now. Forensic analysts identified fingerprints across the notebook. Most were Marissa's, but several partial prints matched Ethan's, confirmed against his known set. He claimed they came from borrowing the notebook once during class. The excuse was plausible, but the frequency of the matches, 4 separate clusters of partials across different weeks, suggested repeated handling. Keene added the fingerprint chart to the board. The red string now connected the shoe, the torn sweater, the basement patch, and the notebook. The map of objects formed a lattice around Ethan's name. Still, without a body, the district attorney refused indictment. The Hale family pressed forward with their own campaign. Elaine carried the journal into television interviews, reading aloud from its lines. She held it at rallies, lifting it as proof that her daughter's voice had not vanished. Daniel distributed copies online, fueling public pressure. Commentators described the notebook as a ghost witness, a diary that spoke in fragments. Forensic linguists were consulted. They analyzed Marissa's phrasing, the shift in tone from neutral to fearful. The final entries showed shortened sentences, abrupt stops, syntax breakdowns common in stress writing. Experts testified these patterns suggested escalation of anxiety. Though not proof of crime, the findings added to the impression of stalking. Meanwhile, Ethan withdrew from classes. He avoided public spaces, retreated into his parents' home. When confronted by reporters, he offered a single phrase, "I have nothing to do with her." The line played on loop against images of the torn fabric and the notebook pages. Keene remained cautious. He knew juries demanded more than patterns. He pressed labs for deeper analysis. Under ultraviolet scan, one journal page revealed smudged stains. Chemical tests showed traces of human sweat mixed with soil. The soil composition matched samples from the brush where the sweater fragment had been recovered. The implication was that the journal had been handled after exposure to the same ground. How it had returned to her dorm drawer remained unanswered. Speculation grew. Had someone planted it back? Or had Marissa herself written in it after that night, only to vanish later? The timeline strained under these questions. Keene wrote in his notes, "Pages authentic, placement uncertain, must treat as both voice and riddle." Elaine refused ambiguity. To her, the words were her daughter's testimony, a record she could hold. She folded photocopies into her wallet, carrying them everywhere. Daniel began reading excerpts at campus vigils, his voice steady as candles burned. The journal deepened the story but resolved nothing. It gave language to fear, outlined a pattern, pointed at a suspect. Yet the central absence remained. No body, no location, no certainty. Only sentences ending mid-line, the pen halting as if interrupted forever. The final line ended mid-sentence. The journal shifted the case from a single missing student into the shape of a pursuit. No longer was Ethan Rowe merely a person of interest. He was a name drawn into every sentence, every headline, every whisper on campus. Yet investigators knew that focusing on one man too quickly could risk collapse in court. They spread the net wider, pulling in every detail from Marissa Hale's circle. Detective Harold Keene began with party attendees. Witness lists stretched across multiple pages. Students recounted fragments of memory blurred by alcohol and late hours. Some insisted Marissa left in good spirits, others described her tense, arms crossed. Tyler Mendez, who had first placed Ethan beside her, was interviewed again. This time his timeline shifted. He admitted leaving the party briefly to smoke behind the house, returning just as Marissa and Ethan walked out. The discrepancy was logged, and Keene marked his statement as unreliable. Attention turned to Sophie Tran, the other primary witness. She held to her story, insisting Marissa laughed as she left. But when shown the journal entry about being followed from the library, Sophie grew quiet. She admitted Marissa had complained about Ethan, but insisted she thought it was only teasing. "I didn't think it was serious," she told police. "I didn't think it was dangerous." Her statement was sealed in the record, a reminder of opportunities missed. Other names surfaced. A groundskeeper reported seeing a car parked on the access road near the brush on May 26, headlights off. He described a brown sedan but could not identify the driver. A neighbor near Ethan's home swore he heard digging noises after midnight days later, though when pressed he admitted it might have been nothing more than repairs. Each account carried weight and doubt in equal measure. Investigators searched for alternate suspects. One line of inquiry examined a known transient who sometimes slept in the wooded area behind campus. He was questioned, his belongings searched. No connection emerged. Another involved a fellow student once rumored to be jealous of Marissa's friendships. That lead, too, dissolved after interviews and alibis. Still, Ethan remained central. His car continued to draw scrutiny. Forensic analysts returned to fibers collected from the trunk. Under advanced microscopy, 2 fibers matched the weave of Marissa's sweater. The match was not absolute. Fibers were common. But when combined with location, suspicion intensified. Exhibit G was logged, fiber analysis consistent with victim's clothing. Detectives reconstructed Ethan's timeline. He claimed he returned home by 2:30 a.m. Phone records showed his cell inactive until 4:12 a.m. when it pinged off a tower near the outer highway, far from his apartment. Asked to explain, Ethan said he sometimes drove at night to clear his head. No one confirmed it. The statement was noted, underlined twice. The Hale family pressed authorities publicly. At a rally, Daniel Hale held the journal in one hand, a blown-up image of the torn sweater in the other. "How many objects do you need before you see the pattern?" he demanded. His words echoed across campus news feeds. Keene felt the pressure but kept methodical. He built a suspect matrix, columns of names, rows of evidence. Ethan's column filled with lines of red. Others contained scattered entries, weak connections. No one else accumulated weight in the same way. In August, a break arrived. A receipt surfaced from a late-night convenience store near the Brush area, timestamped 3:02 a.m. the night of the disappearance. Surveillance footage, grainy, showed a figure resembling Ethan buying a pack of cigarettes. He wore a sweater draped over his shoulder, though the image was too blurred to match it to Marissa's. The receipt, Exhibit H, placed him away from his claimed location. Confronted, Ethan's attorney dismissed the footage as inconclusive. Shadows and guesses, he said, but Keene added it to the board, another line of red string. The pool of suspects narrowed. Friends, neighbors, strangers, each was tested and discarded. What remained was a single figure whose story bent under scrutiny, whose car smelled of bleach, whose basement slab cooled more slowly than stone should. Yet prosecutors still hesitated. Without a body, they argued, juries would doubt. Cases built on suspicion alone had collapsed before. They wanted certainty. They wanted bones, blood, an object undeniable. Keene countered that certainty might never come if action stalled. The debate grew tense, the Hale family caught in the center. Public anger mounted. Students wore ribbons. Faculty issued statements, petitions demanded charges. Ethan became a pariah, unable to walk campus without stairs. His parents sheltered him, their windows shuttered. Rumors swirled of threats, of fights in parking lots. Still he did not break, did not confess. The suspect board remained in place, a web of photographs and strings. Exhibit A, the shoe. Exhibit D, the torn sweater. Exhibit F, the journal. Exhibit G, fibers in the trunk. Exhibit H, the receipt. Each formed a chain that looped back to one man. For investigators, the question was no longer who but how to prove it. For the Hale family, proof had already been written in her own words. For the community, the suspect was decided, guilty in all but court. His alibi cracked under a single overlooked receipt. Years passed, but the board of evidence remained pinned in a lecture hall turned command post. Lines of red string yellowed with dust. The case entered its second decade without indictment. What should have been momentum stalled into bureaucracy, and whispers of obstruction began to surface. Records later revealed that the county sheriff's office cycled through 6 different investigators between 1997 and 2004. Each inherited a stack of binders and conflicting witness statements. Some pursued Ethan Rowe aggressively, others allowed files to stagnate. Critical leads went dormant. A campus maintenance log noting the camera outage was misfiled for years. A call from a neighbor about late-night digging never made it past a dispatcher's desk. The Hale family grew certain someone was resisting the case from within. They filed records requests and received redacted pages, black lines erasing names, dates, and conclusions. One memo surfaced with a single haunting sentence: "Insufficient evidence at this time. Further inquiry may disrupt community relations." Richard Hale read it again and again, his knuckles whitening on the page. Journalists chasing the story found similar walls. Requests for reports returned incomplete, with logs missing critical hours. When pressed, officials blamed clerical error, yet the pattern repeated too often. By 2008, whispers spread that Ethan's family connections, an uncle on the county planning board, a cousin employed in the sheriff's office, had shielded him from charges. Proof was thin, but the impression of favoritism hardened. Forensic mishandling added to suspicion. The shoe, Exhibit A, was stored improperly for a time, allowing mold to spread across the canvas. When retested years later, potential trace DNA had degraded. Analysts admitted under oath that preservation standards had been breached. The torn sweater fragment, Exhibit D, went missing for several months before being rediscovered in an evidence freezer mislabeled as property. Each mistake carved away confidence. The Hale family responded with relentless advocacy. Elaine appeared on local news twice a year, holding the journal. Daniel founded a foundation in his sister's name, staging rallies, building pressure. He printed leaflets listing every known mistake: the blank tape, the lost fragment, the conflicting witness statements. Students wore those lists taped to their backpacks, a silent protest. Detective Keene, by then retired, wrote a private letter to the family. He confessed his belief that evidence had been quietly buried, not by accident but by choice. "Certain doors closed when they should have opened," he wrote. "I cannot say who closed them, only that it was deliberate." The letter was sealed in the family's archive, later revealed to journalists when the case finally broke. In 2011, a major leak reached the press. A set of internal emails from the district attorney's office showed reluctance to pursue charges because of political sensitivity. One line referenced Ethan by initials only. "Pursuit may be inadvisable until climate shifts. P.R. concerns." The emails became Exhibit I in the court of public opinion. Forensic reviews grew harsher. Independent experts hired by the Hale Foundation re-examined soil samples from the basement cores. They found inconsistencies in chain-of-custody logs, gaps of days where the samples sat unaccounted for. One container bore a broken seal. Such breaches rendered results contestable, exactly what prosecutors had warned. The appearance of cover-up spread beyond incompetence into intent. Activists demanded resignations. Editorials accused officials of shielding one of their own. Though no direct proof of conspiracy emerged, the accumulation of omissions, misfiled reports, and lost evidence formed a mosaic of obstruction. By 2016, pressure from national outlets forced a new wave of inquiry. Reporters unearthed deposition transcripts that revealed investigators had been instructed to avoid disruption to university reputation. That phrase, repeated across documents, suggested the institution itself feared scandal more than truth. The Hale family stood outside the courthouse with copies of those lines enlarged on posters. Students marched behind them. The journal returned to prominence. Its pages had been doubted for years, but in the atmosphere of suspected cover-up, every line sounded prophetic. Elaine read aloud again, "He will walk me back whether I want or not." To the public, it was no longer a private fear. It was evidence ignored. In closed rooms, officials debated liability. Each revelation of mishandling risked lawsuits. Prosecutors weighed the damage to their office against the cost of admitting mistakes. For years, they chose silence, but silence eroded. The network of protection frayed as new technology offered fresh avenues. DNA methods improved. Analysts returned to the hair fragment from the basement core. Mitochondrial results, once vague, now sharpened. Combined with updated databases, the link to Marissa's maternal line became stronger. Still not absolute, but powerful when paired with the pattern of obstruction. The cover-up no longer looked like shadows. It looked like structure, misplaced evidence, redacted memos, delayed warrants, political caution. Each piece alone could be error. Together they suggested intent. The Hale family kept pressing, year after year. They understood now that justice would not arrive solely through evidence. It would come by forcing the system to confront its own reluctance. A redacted line hinted at buried evidence. When the possibility of cover-up turned public, the focus widened beyond Ethan Rowe himself. Attention fell on the web of people around him, the subtle network that had kept suspicion at bay for years. It was not a single shield, but overlapping layers. Family, colleagues, acquaintances, and the quiet machinery of a university that had feared scandal more than truth. Investigators reviewing records traced phone calls made in the weeks after Marissa vanished. Ethan's father had contacted a cousin in the sheriff's office multiple times, conversations unlogged officially but visible in billing data. Notes surfaced from an early meeting where officers discussed limited pursuit to prevent community backlash. Though no names were written, initials matched figures in local government. Emails leaked later revealed further ties. A message from a university administrator to the sheriff's department suggested coordination. Contain rumors quickly. Emphasize voluntary departure narrative. Another, recovered from a backup server, discussed potential reputational damage if the case focused too heavily on a student with family ties to donors. These lines became Exhibit J in the Hale family's growing archive. Neighbors, too, had seen the patterns. One remembered sheriff's vehicles parked outside the Rowe home, not to question but to socialize. Another described Ethan's uncle boasting that this will never touch him during a barbecue. Such stories were hearsay, yet each added to the sense of a protective circle. Forensic anchors pointed indirectly to the network. The blank camera tape, Exhibit B, required clearance to disable. Campus maintenance logs showed Ethan had access, but approval for his position came from a higher office, signed by an administrator later linked to the email about containing rumors. The connection was circumstantial, but the threads began to overlap. Journalists traced campaign donations from Ethan's relatives to county officials. Small amounts but consistent, recurring every election cycle. Reporters asked whether these ties explained years of inaction. Officials denied influence, insisting investigations were limited by evidence alone. Yet the optics darkened. Within the community, anger grew. Students formed a coalition, staging vigils with copies of leaked emails projected onto dorm walls. Protesters carried cutouts of the shoe, the sweater, the journal, chanting "No more silence." The university, once quiet, faced national coverage of its failures. Meanwhile, the Hale family expanded their own records. Daniel cataloged every leak, every document into a searchable database. He cross-referenced names, highlighting overlaps between officials, donors, and Roe relatives. What emerged was less conspiracy than pattern, a network of relationships that made hesitation convenient. Detective Keene, long retired, gave one final interview. "It wasn't that someone ordered a cover-up," he said. "It was that too many people found it easier to do nothing." His words became the thesis of the network, not a grand plot but a lattice of apathy, favors, and silence. Still, evidence trickled. In 2018, digital forensics uncovered a deleted email from years prior. It had survived on a forgotten server, written by a junior investigator frustrated by orders to step back. "I don't understand why we're holding the fibers, the car, the journal. Anyone else would be in custody by now." His message had been ignored, his career later stalled. That document, Exhibit K, entered the public archive. The Roe family themselves revealed the network through actions. When Ethan was subpoenaed for civil deposition, 5 different attorneys appeared, each paid through family connections. Costs mounted into hundreds of thousands, yet relatives supported him. Their solidarity displayed the network's durability, a circle unwilling to fracture even as pressure grew. Forensic developments finally pierced through. Advanced DNA testing re-examined stains on the journal page. Analysts isolated degraded material that, when compared against the Hale family, aligned to Marissa's paternal line. Not definitive but consistent. The match was announced alongside the revelation of obstructed records, fueling outrage. Public protests reached their peak. Students marched with photographs of the basement core samples, chanting dates when evidence had been lost. Local officials faced recall petitions. The network that once protected now threatened to collapse under exposure. The trial that loomed would not be about Ethan alone, but about the scaffolding that allowed silence. Reporters prepared pieces not just on a missing student but on the structures that buried her case. And yet the body remained absent. All that could be placed before the court was a pattern of objects, a journal that spoke in fragments, and the outline of a network too tangled to deny. One deleted email survived on a backup drive. By the time the case passed its 20th year, the story no longer belonged only to investigators and suspects. It belonged to the survivors who had lived with absence as a constant weight. The Hale family, once defined by routine dinners and weekend trips, now revolved around anniversaries of disappearance, vigils on campus, and the slow erosion of hope. Elaine Hale carried her daughter's photograph in every purse she owned. She kept a copy of the journal on the kitchen table, never packed away. She refused to repaint Marissa's bedroom, even as curtains faded and dust gathered on the desk. Richard withdrew into silence, tending his garden as if rows of tomatoes could impose order on a world that had taken his child. Conversations between them shrank into brief exchanges, weather reports, reminders to eat. The weight of the case hollowed their marriage, leaving only shared determination. Daniel grew into adulthood with the case as his constant companion. At 19, he had helped staple flyers to telephone poles. At 29, he ran a foundation in his sister's name, hosting press conferences, updating the digital archive of evidence. His apartment became another command post, its walls lined with copies of exhibits, the shoe photograph, the torn sweater, the journal page under ultraviolet light. He lived surrounded by reminders, each artifact both anchor and burden. Friends of Marissa aged too, carrying guilt in different shapes. Lena Torres never forgave herself for sleeping while Marissa disappeared. She developed insomnia, often pacing her apartment in the early hours when memory returned strongest. She attended therapy, her medical records later noting symptoms of post-traumatic stress, flashbacks, panic at sudden noises, recurring dreams of footsteps in hallways. These records, though private, became part of the story, Exhibit L in the Archive of Human Cost. Sophie Tran spoke publicly at vigils, her voice halting as she admitted dismissing Marissa's complaints about Ethan as harmless. She repeated the same line at each event. "I thought it was nothing. I was wrong." The sentence became a refrain among students, a warning to listen when fear is spoken. The wider community carried its own scars. Professors remembered empty seats in lecture halls, a desk left unused. Each May, students gathered at the quad where the shoe had been found, candles outlining the patch of dirt. Alumni donated funds for scholarships in her name, their letters often apologetic, as if they too had failed her. The psychological toll extended beyond memory. Families of other students grew protective, imposing curfews, discouraging late-night walks. A generation of young women carried keys between their fingers when crossing campus. Fear became ritual, woven into daily life. Forensic echoes intruded into survivor lives. Elaine once received a package from the police, the returned sweater fragment sealed again. She held it through gloves, unable to reconcile fabric with absence. Daniel requested copies of lab reports, tracing probability percentages as if numbers could transform into certainty. Lena visited the evidence room once, staring at the shoe under glass. She later told a counselor it felt like looking at a body without a face. Media attention reawakened wounds each cycle. Every anniversary brought cameras, every new test brought interviews. Survivors repeated stories until words lost meaning. They aged in front of lenses, their grief becoming public property. Yet they endured, convinced repetition was necessary to keep her name alive. Community trust fractured. Many residents came to believe the case had been deliberately stalled, that their institutions had chosen reputation over truth. This erosion of trust reshaped local politics, fueling campaigns on transparency and reform. Officials once shielded by silence now faced skepticism at every step. Yet through fatigue, survivors created rituals of resilience. The Hale family left an empty chair at Thanksgiving, a place setting untouched. On Marissa's birthday, Daniel placed a candle at the dorm memorial, watching its flame flicker under campus lamps. Students repainted murals each year, layering colors over fading images. These acts did not heal but preserved memory against forgetting. The survivors lived in the absence of remains without graves to visit. Their grief was suspended, a wound that never closed. Psychologists describe this as ambiguous loss, a state that eroded certainty but extended endurance. The Hale family embodied it, decades without answers, decades refusing to accept silence. Forensic anchors testified to their persistence. Therapy notes logged symptoms. Vigil attendance lists showed hundreds each year. Donation records traced a movement that grew from one family's tragedy into a community demand. Each artifact joined the archive not of crime but of endurance. Survival did not mean recovery. It meant carrying weight forward, reshaping lives around a void. The Hale family, Lena, Sophie, the students, the town, all became part of the case's legacy. They were the living evidence, the testimony of what a disappearance leaves behind. The family dining table kept one empty chair. In 2022, 26 years after Marissa Hale vanished, the case finally entered the courtroom. What had been rumor, suspicion, and fragments of evidence was reshaped into testimony, exhibits, and the ritual of law. For the Hale family, the trial was not relief but ordeal. Decades of grief replayed under fluorescent lights, recorded by stenographers, argued over by attorneys who spoke of their daughter as data points. The prosecution built its case on the accumulation of objects. Exhibit A. The shoe, canvas stained. Drag marks photographed. Exhibit D. The torn sweater fragment, blood traces confirmed by modern tests. Exhibit F. The journal with its final unfinished sentence. Exhibit G. Fibers in the trunk of Ethan Rowe's car consistent with that sweater. Exhibit H. The convenience store receipt, timestamped during the hours he claimed to be home. Exhibit K. The deleted email from an investigator, proof that the case had been doubted from within. Each was displayed on screens, enlarged, annotated. Jurors watched as a life disappeared piece by piece. Forensic experts testified. One described the mitochondrial DNA results from the basement core hair, linking it to Marissa's maternal line. Another explained the degraded blood trace on the journal page, aligning with soil from the brush. A technician outlined how the blank security tape had been deliberately disabled, not malfunctioning, requiring someone with clearance. Each expert spoke in steady tones, technical language, cautious qualifiers. But together, their testimony outlined a narrative more complete than fragments alone. The defense countered by attacking time. They emphasized the decades that had passed, the lost evidence, the chain of custody failures. They argued the journal could not be proven authentic in placement, that fibers were too common to convict, that memories of witnesses had degraded beyond reliability. They repeated the phrase reasonable doubt until it echoed. Ethan himself sat silent through most proceedings. When he testified, his voice was flat. He admitted walking Marissa home but denied harming her. He explained the bleach in his car as cleaning habit, the receipt as coincidence, the fingerprints on her notebook as casual borrowing. His parents sat behind him each day, their faces unreadable. The Hale family occupied the opposite row. Elaine clutched the journal through testimony. Richard kept his eyes fixed on exhibits, never glancing at Ethan. Daniel took notes obsessively, logging each moment, determined to preserve every word for the archive. Witnesses returned to speak. Lena described finding the journal, her voice shaking. Sophie admitted dismissing Marissa's fears. The neighbor recalled hearing digging noises. Each statement, small in isolation, formed part of a wider frame. The trial stretched for weeks. Reporters filled the gallery, their stories broadcast nationally. Headlines spoke of justice after decades, and the journal that wouldn't stay silent. Public opinion weighed heavily. For many, guilt had been assumed long before the verdict, but jurors had to weigh evidence within the rules of law. Closing arguments crystallized the divide. The prosecution described a pattern. A student vanished, her shoe abandoned, her sweater torn, her journal fearful, her last companion evasive. They argued no one else had motive, means, and opportunity combined. The defense urged restraint. No body, no weapon. Gaps in evidence too large to cross. They asked jurors to resist emotion, to remember the burden of proof. Deliberation lasted 2 days. The jury requested to see the shoe again, to examine the photograph of drag marks, to reread the journal's final page. They asked about the DNA reports, about the certainty of matches. Then, on the 3rd afternoon, they returned. The foreperson rose, voice steady, guilty of murder in the 1st degree. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elaine covered her face. Richard closed his eyes. Daniel gripped the table edge until his knuckles whitened. Ethan sat motionless, expression blank, as if verdict were another rumor to endure. His attorney whispered, but he did not reply. Sentencing came weeks later. The judge spoke of evidence long obscured, of a family's persistence, of a community forced to face neglect. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison. No possibility of parole for 25 years. The gavel struck. Yet even as justice was declared, absence remained. Marissa's body had never been found. The Hale family left the courthouse knowing they had a conviction but not closure. Elaine said it plainly outside the doors. "We have a verdict, but we do not have our daughter." The verdict echoed louder than the gavel. The verdict did not end the story, it redrew its shape. For the Hale family, justice was delivered in form but not in substance. A conviction existed, a man was imprisoned, but the absence that had hollowed their lives remained unfilled. Without a body, there was no grave, no final place to lay flowers. The conviction became a substitute, cold and abstract, a line of text in the record where their daughter's body should have been. Elaine returned to the campus memorial the week after sentencing. Students had left candles in a circle, melted wax pooling into hardened shapes. Above them hung a single white shoe on a metal hook, placed there years before. She touched it with the tips of her fingers, as though it could connect her to the one object that had survived the night her daughter vanished. Richard buried himself in work around the house. Neighbors saw him repainting fences, repairing gutters, trimming hedges. Each task was endless, as if motion could keep grief at bay. At night he sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the photocopy of the journal's final unfinished line. He never spoke of it aloud, but he read it nightly. Daniel continued the foundation's work. He expanded the database of documents, publishing trial transcripts, exhibits, and forensic reports. He argued the case was not only about one crime but about the system that had allowed silence for so long. His lectures to universities carried titles like Evidence and Apathy and The Cost of Delay. For him, survival meant shaping absence into lesson. The town itself bore marks. Trust in institutions collapsed. The university faced lawsuits from alumni and families who accused it of shielding its reputation instead of protecting students. The sheriff's office endured resignations, investigations into misconduct, and years of public scorn. Each election became a referendum on the case. Journalists described the story as a parable of persistence. Editorials called it proof that families could force justice when institutions refused. Documentaries replayed the forensic anchors: the shoe, the torn sweater, the basement concrete, the journal. Each became symbolic, objects carrying weight beyond their material form. Yet survivors knew symbols could not replace reality. Elaine spoke softly in interviews. "Every year I hope for a phone call that someone will say where she is. Convictions do not tell me that." Richard rarely appeared in public, his silence more eloquent than speeches. Daniel grew hardened, his advocacy sharp, his patience thin. Survivors of other cases sought him for guidance. He told them only this: "Do not stop speaking the name." Forensic echoes lingered. The fibers in the car, the hair in the core, the degraded stains, all remained locked in storage, sealed in bags, silent but present. Each time the Hale family received an update about evidence retention, they felt the weight of objects standing in for their daughter. Campus life moved forward in cycles. New students arrived each year, many unaware of the case until orientation included the memorial. They learned quickly. The vigil at the quad became annual ritual. Faculty carried the story into classrooms, reminding students that institutions could fail. Memory became curriculum. The Rowe family faded from public life. Ethan's parents moved away, their home sold, the basement forever marked in local memory. Some said they too were victims of his choices. Others insisted their silence had enabled him. Either way, their name carried the stain of association. In prison, Ethan offered no confession. He remained silent, appealing without success. Each denial deepened the unresolved absence. Without his words, the location of Marissa's body stayed hidden. For the survivors, aftermath meant learning to live inside contradiction, justice and absence, victory and loss. Elaine described it as living in two rooms at once, one where we won and one where she is still gone. The community understood. They saw the empty chair at Hale family gatherings, the annual candlelight vigils, the shoe suspended on its hook. They carried forward the lesson that silence was not safety, that delay could be as brutal as crime. History recorded the case as resolved, but those who lived it knew better. A conviction had been won, but closure never arrived. The aftermath was not healing, it was endurance, the long persistence of grief that refuses to end. A single shoe hung in silence above the memorial.